Hi, everyone, and welcome to this recording, which is part of a series of ERCC updates that we prepared ahead of our ERCC AGM. I'm Alex Westphal. I'm the secretary of the ERCC, and as part of my role, I've also had the pleasure to coordinate our very extensive work on SFTR implementation, which has been obviously a huge focus for us over the past years. So I'm very happy to give another quick update today on where we are with SFTR and what's still to come. So let's start with this slide, which I also showed at the previous AGM, the long and winding road that is SFTR. This is where we got to by the time of the previous general meeting. Now, since then, we've gone further down the road and have indeed passed a number of additional milestones. In October, we've seen the buy-side go live. Similar to the first two phases, this has been surprisingly smooth, hardly any disruption that we've seen to the rejection rates at the trade repositories, which stayed at around 95%. So that's very positive. At the end of the year, then another important event, the end of the Brexit transition period, which resulted effectively in a split of SFTR into two separate reporting regimes, UK SFTR and EU SFTR, both with their respective authorized trade repositories. And those, along with the vendors, of course, have very much helped to ensure that this was also a smooth transition process. And then finally, in January this year, we've seen the fourth and final go live phase with non-financial counterparties starting to report. Important to note here that following Brexit, this only applies in the EU. So in the UK, NFCs are in fact exempt from SFTR reporting. So SFTR is now fully live, but that doesn't mean that we've reached the end of the road. And it also doesn't mean that our involvement stops here. In fact, there is still quite a lot going on. Our SFTR task force, which brings together over 150 firms across the whole market, really continues to be quite active. We meet on a monthly basis. The key focus is really to monitor progress and to track reporting issues that members are observing, and obviously also to discuss ways to resolve these through best practice. So we've put together a log of implementation issues to support this process that covers now well over 50 issues across the entire reporting lifecycle, really. So that covers trade repository rejections, matching breaks, pairing issues, and also a number of other problems that we're seeing. So that has been helpful for us, but also in fact for regulators. We've shared the list on a quite regular basis with ESMA and also the FCA and some of the national competent authorities as well, which is important because quite a few of the issues are actually related to problems with the underlying rules, which need to be obviously addressed by regulators. And that brings me to the next point, our discussions with regulators, which continues to be a really important element of our work. We've obviously already seen a lot of important additional guidance from ESMA. So that's the so-called level 3. One more recent addition that we've seen is the SFTR Q&As, which cover a number of additional clarifications, and this is in fact an ongoing process. So we've seen the Q&As, the initial version in November 2020, and also already a first update, which ESMA issued in January. At the same time, ESMA is of course also reviewing the existing documents, including the validation rules and also the XML schemas, both very important documents. As ICMA, we've submitted quite detailed comments on both of those to ESMA, which we hope they will take on board for the next iteration, and those changes should address a number of the reporting issues that I mentioned earlier. Another key focus at the moment, which I should mention here, is issuer LEIs, legal entity identifiers. This is a mandatory field under SFTR, but in many markets, especially outside Europe, there are still huge gaps in LEI availability. And that includes major jurisdictions such as the US and Japan. So given those difficulties, ESMA had initially granted a 12-month forbearance period during which issuer LEIs were not required, at least for non-EEA issuers. Now this period comes to an end in April. There's been quite a lot of effort at an industry level to encourage more LEI issuance, collaborating, for instance, with GLIFE, the Global LEI Foundation, and also ANNA, the Association of National Numbering Agencies. Unfortunately, and perhaps not too surprisingly, the gap remains still very significant. So mandating issuer LEIs at this point could still be really disruptive. So on the 8th of March, we submitted a joint industry letter to ESMA to reiterate these concerns, and we certainly hope that they will come up with a realistic solution. Finally, also to mention that eventually there will also be a chance to review SFTR more broadly. This was initially scheduled to launch in April, but is now very likely to be postponed to much later this year or even early next year. So while all these discussions are ongoing within the task force and also with regulators, our detailed best practices, of course, also continue to evolve accordingly. In February, we published the now 6th edition of the ICMA recommendations for reporting under SFTR, now well over 300 pages. So that's available on our website, along with a number of complementary best practice documents, including our detailed SFTR sample reports, which cover over 50 repo reporting scenarios. And then finally, I should also mention the SFTR public data. As you know, under SFTR, the trade repositories are obliged to publish on a weekly basis some summary statistics. Unfortunately, these only cover a very limited set of data points, but of course, still very relevant information. To make sure that at least we use the data, we decided to take in the data from all the TRs involved, aggregate them, and publish it in a more user-friendly and accessible way on our website, along with some basic charts. So that data is available every week from our SFTR public data page. So please do have a look. And I'd also invite you to have a look at the latest edition of our European Repo Survey in this context, which we published this week. In fact, the 40th edition of the survey. The current survey includes an interesting, more detailed look at that SFTR data as well, and a comparison with the Repo Survey data. So that as well is available on our website. So with that, I come to the end, but as usual, please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions or would like to get more closely involved in our work. Thank you very much for listening.